Okay, finally ready to start. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. We continue finally our shiur on the Amidah. In the previous couple of weeks, I think I released some bonus episodes about Yiskar and about what else did I talk about? I'm trying to remember. Um, but we took a break because of the Sukkot schedule from speaking about the Amidah. And tonight we're continuing with the 17th bracha of the Shemona Esrei, and that is called Birkat HaAvodah, the bracha of Avodah, better known popularly as Ritzeh. Everybody simply calls this bracha Ritzeh. The only time you're going to find somebody calling this bracha Avodah is if they're talking about it in an academic sense. If they're discussing a Mishnah, they're discussing a Brisa. Once in a while in Halacha, you'll see it referred to as the Bracha of Avodah. But today, almost everybody refers to it as the Bracha of Ritzeh. Now, this is a little bit unusual because most of the brachot that you and I know of in Amidah, they are called by the name of their chatima, like Chonin Hadat is called Dat, Teshuvah is called Harotzeh B'Teshuvah. All of the brachot get their names from the final words. However, the final words of our bracha do not contain the word avodah. In the ancient Eretz Yisrael version, the Nusach of Eretz Yisrael, they had which is extinct, they had a Nusach of Sheotcha levadecha b'yirah avod, or She'otcha levadecha na'avod. And the Ashkenazim would be familiar with that nusach because they retained it on the Yamim Noraim. However, um, this bracha is confounding for many, many reasons. It is a giant topic, and I'm frankly embarrassed that I'm not ready enough to give the shiur tonight because throughout the entire Chag, I took the luxury of studying other svarim and other topics that, I had the extra time to do on the Chag, and I didn't realize what a tremendous corpus of material and sugyas there are to know about this bracha. So tonight, what I'm going to do is we're going to split it into two. Tonight, we're going to discuss the avodah in the most ancient sources, in the ancient origins for this bracha from the time of the Beit HaMikdash and earlier. And in the following shiurim, we will discuss from Yavne onwards, from Rabbi Gamliel going forward. So to begin with, if you think of the bracha as a bracha of Shemona Esrei, right? And you look here at our chart that we've showed a few times in the internal brachot of Shemona Esrei, you'll notice that the Shemona Esrei has a tripartite structure. There's the first three brachot, right? Those are introductory and praise. Then there's the middle 12 or 13, and those brachot are requests. And then there's the last three brachot in Shemona Esrei, and those are typically understood as departing or thanksgiving brachot. However, this bracha, as far as what do you call it? As far as we have it in our nusach today, it is none of the above. It's very strange. Why is it here? This is such a strange bracha. Is this a bracha for the restoration of Yerushalayim? And if it is, why isn't it one of the bakashot that have to do with the national rebuilding of Yerushalayim? Why isn't it internal to the bakashot? Why do we put it after Shomea Tefillah? It seems to be Hamachzir Shechinato Letzion seems to be a request for the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. So why is it after Shomea Tefillah? Why is it considered one of the Thanksgiving birachot? This is such a fundamental problem that led many scholars to question the very veracity of the tripartite theory. Was the Shemona Esrei always part of a three-part structure? Meaning, when the Amidah was conceived and designed as the 18 brachot, with three in the beginning, 12 in the middle, and three at the end, or sorry, in the early formulations, even if you don't have that precise number, precise structure, was it always three parts? Perhaps there was no last part. Perhaps they just ended Shomea Tefillah and then maybe did Birkat Kohanim. What is the Bracha of Avodah doing here? This throws a wrench into our entire understanding of the structure of Shvach, Bakasha, and Hoda'ah. So if we follow the text of the of Ritzeh itself, we find it to be even more strange. Look here, and what I did here is I did is I color coded. The orange represents what's most likely the most ancient section. The yellow, the most recent, and the white is post the Churban. Now, there's three different topics here. Everything in orange is asking all the text here in orange. For example, if you're listening on the audio, Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu ba'amachai Yisrael, v'ishe Yisrael mehira be'ava tekabel b'ratzon, utihi l'ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha. Those words are asking for Hashem to accept our korban now, right? This is a bracha that sounds like it's asking for Hashem to accept our korban. And as I hinted to before, the Beracha of the Avodah existed in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and it was used uh, in regards to and accompanying certain korbanot, meaning after they would bring a korban, they would say a Beracha of Avodah. So some of the text here looks like it's from that ancient bracha. Some of the text of Ritzeh looks like it's really from there. Ritzeh Hashem Elokeinu b'amachei Yisrael v'ishe Yisrael and their fire offerings meher ba'ava t'kabel b'ratzon. And even more so, some scholars have seen this. Not scholars of all types, honestly. Jewish and sometimes accidentally Christian scholars will see this too. Utila ratzon tamid, not tamid as forever, but the korban tamid. Utila ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha. You'll find many chachamim and chokrim and rabbanim wondering whether or not tamid here means forever, or does tamid here mean korban tamid, and allow for leratzon should and utihi leratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha, and should the service and the worship of your people be favorable before you always, or should the korban tamid service be always favorable before you? So you could see some of the text here is very similar to a text that a Kohen would say if he was bringing a korban in the Beit HaMikdash. And then look at the yellow. Inside the bracha, besides the topic of avodah, interjected is the topic of tefillah. Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu b'amachei Yisrael. And then we add vilit tfilatam she'eh, right? There's a vav there. Somebody added in at some point vilit tfilatam she'eh. And then you have v'ishe Yisrael, and someone added in with a vav utefilatam, meaning that the Chachamim understood or were trying to introduce the idea that the tefillot should be equal to the avodah, to the sacrifices and the korban bringing. And finally, in white, we have all the text which asks not for the present. All the text there's text here. The orange text is for asking for the now, for the korban to be accepted now. But the rest of the text asks for the restoration of the Beis Hamikdash and the return of the Shechina to the Beis Hamikdash. V'hashev ha'avodah levir beitecha, ve'ata barachamecha harabim tachpotz banu, v'techzena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion rachamim baruch atah Hashem ha'machazir shechinato l'tzion. So we have almost three different topics here. We have one set of text inside the bracha, which seems to be talking about the here and now, about the korban. We have text in the bracha which talks about the tefillah, that not the korban should be accepted, rather the tefillah should be accepted. And finally, we have another topic here about the restoration of the service to what do you call it? One second. The return of the service to Yerushalayim. Now, clearly, this text of Ritzeh, as we have, among all of the texts of the Amidah, is the most ancient. Already, the earliest scholars who studied the Amidah noticed that Ritzeh was probably the most ancient bracha on Shemona Esrei. There's even a medrash in Tehillim, which says that the Hasidim Harishonim were the ones who modified the bracha of the Avodah to be a bracha that spoke about the Chazara, the return of the Shekhinah to Tzion. So clearly, this is one of the most ancient prayers, and also from the slide I just showed you, clearly the bracha is the history of it is diachronic, meaning that it was developed in layers or in stages, and there's a history to its development where stage after stage the text evolved into the final form that we know of it today. So now, where do we know? What are the earliest sources for the bracha of the Avodah? What are the earliest sources that inform us about the what do you call it? What are the earliest sources that inform us about its nature before the establishment of the Amidah? So I'm indebted to the work of Yitzchak Landis. Yitzchak Landis is probably very young, a fairly young scholar of liturgy, I believe. I think that was his specialty. He wrote his dissertation on the Beracha of Ritzeh, and he published a book called Birkat HaAvodah B'Tfilat HaMidah, a book where he examines the history of the Avodah, both before and after the Amidah. This is available online. I would highly recommend anybody who wants to study the Beracha of Ritzeh should pull out this book. It's a really short, honestly, it's a short book. It's only about 150 pages. It's expertly done and it's very, very current. It's from 2018. And so I am very indebted to his work here. But a lot of these sugyot that we're about to look over, we've also seen before. So we've studied this by Emet V'Yatziv. We've studied this by Baruch. There's, oops, yeah, there's quite a few of these sugyot that we're going to look at now that we've seen before. So forgive me if it's a little bit familiar. First is the Mishnah in Tamid. The Mishnah in Tamid was is one of the oldest strata of the Mishnayot that we have. Even the Gemara in Yoma in Daf Yudal Amud Bet recognizes that the language of the Mishnayot in Tamid are different than the regular Mishnayot in Shas. The regular Mishnayot in Shas have a language which is very didactic. It'll tell you what the law is, what the rule is, step by step. But the language in Masechet Tamid is very much a narrative. It's a first-person account of what happened in the Beit HaMikdash on a daily basis. And for that reason, the Gemara in Yoma, as well as in Yerushalmi, attribute it to a person. They say it was written by a person. The name they give is Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. We know nothing about this person. All we know is that he was a Tana who lived in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. And clearly, from the fact that he had a first-person testimony, he was probably a Kohen. And his testimony for what happened in the Beit HaMikdash is reflected in the Mishnayot in Tamid. And here we have the Mishnah in Perek Hey. Let's read this together. Amar lehem Munah. After the Kohanim would finish putting the Evarim on the ramp of the Mizbeach, the Evarim of the Tamid, they would interrupt for a prayer service. The appointed Kohen would tell them. They would go to the Lishkat HaGazit. They would go to a section called the Chamber of Hewn Stone, and they would have a short prayer service. He would tell them, the leader, the appointed priest would say, Baruchu beracha achat, say one blessing, vehin baruchu, and they would say a blessing. The Mishnah doesn't say what this blessing is. Then it says, then he would tell them, Karu aseret hadivarim, read the aseret hadivarim, Shema v'hayam Shema v'yomer. Okay. They would say the three parashiot of Shema. So Aseret Devarim, Shema, V'hayam Shemon V'yomer. Berchu et ha'am, shalosh brachot. Bless the nation, three brachot. And then it explains Emet V'yatziv Avodah Uberkat Kohanim. Those three brachot were Emet V'yatziv, which is the final bracha of Kriyat Shema, Va'avodah, the bracha of Avodah, which is our bracha that we're talking about, Uberkat Kohanim, and finally the Birkat Kohanim. Now, this is a source, again, as I said, we've discussed this quite a few times, but there's multiple problems with this text. First of all, the most obvious is why doesn't it say what the Baruch Hu Bracha Achat is? And second of all, doesn't it say Berchu et ha'am, bless the nation, three brachot? Why is Emet V'yatziv and Avodah and Birkat Kohanim, all three of them, a blessing for the nation? I understand Birkat Kohanim, that's a blessing to the nation, but Emet V'yatziv and Avodah, really? Those are blessings for the nation? It sounds like an instruction. Berchu ha'am shalosh brachot. Bless the nation with three brachot, which I would assume would be Birkat Kohanim. This later elaboration, the 6 words after it, don't seem congruent. So there's a lot here. First of all, we've discussed in the past how the mere idea of having a liturgy in the Beit HaMikdash is very surprising, because in the Beit HaMikdash, they were highly specialized in korbanot. That's what the Kohanim did all day. They were specialized in making the korbanot happen in the Beit HaMikdash. Sure, there were shirim, sure, there were shofarot, But what kind of place did tefillah have in the Beit HaMikdash? And this is a major point of contention for early scholarship, for the scholarship of early Jewish liturgy. That is, where did the Jewish liturgy, where is the genesis of institutional or communal Jewish liturgy? Did it start in the Beit HaMikdash, or did it start in this newfangled constitution called synagogas, Batei Knesiyot? Did it start there and then infect the Beit HaMikdash after? And I don't mean to use the word infect in a negative way, but did it start in the Beit HaKnesset and then move to the Beit HaMikdash, or did it start in the Beit HaMikdash and move to the Beit HaKnesset? Did tefillah begin as the first form of communal worship in Beit HaKnesset, or perhaps Kriyat Torah was the first communal form in Beit HaKnesset? This is a very so it's really surprising when we find in a prayer service in the Beit HaMikdash simply because we weren't aware that there was one. The Gemara in Brachot explains that when he says Berchu bracha achat, it must mean one of the brachot of Kriyat Shema. The Amoraim are not sure which one, but they're sure. It must mean one of the brachot of Kriyat Shema. So there's a machloket, Bavli, Rishalmi, different Amoraim. Which bracha was it? Yotzer Or, was it Avar Abba, was it Birkat Torah, etc. There's a lot of discussion here, but what we don't know is where did it come from? Did it come from the outside? Did the brachot of Emet V'Yatziv, were they composed in the Beit HaMikdash or outside of it? Was this practice of saying brachot internal? Was the practice of doing a sequence of brachot internal or external? And when did it start? The Gonim actually have a Mesorah that the same way they did it in the Beit Sheni, they did it in Beit Rishon. They also did Ritzeh. They also did Emet V'Yatziv, which again pushes the timeline back 700 years. But that's the Mesorah of the Gonim. Now, more recently, there's been a push to divide this Mishnah into two parts. This is a more recent scholarship has tried to argue that this Mishnah could be divided into two parts. There's the old part of the Mishnah and the new part of the Mishnah. In the old part of the Mishnah, it said, Amar lahem umuna barchu brachachat vehin barchu. And then it would say, Berchu et ha'am shalosh brachot, and it didn't explain what the three brachot were. Later in the newer edition of the Mishnah, meaning by the time this teaching had reached Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he added the words Emet V'Yatziv Avodah Berkat Kohanim in order to explain what those shalosh brachot meant. And if that's true, then we could argue that Berachot Ha'am Shalosh Brachot just meant bless the nation. Berachot Ha'am, bless the nation, three brachot. Why would we think it meant anything else besides Birkat Kohanim? And therefore, the explanation of Emet V'Yatziv Avodah and Birkat Kohanim doesn't reflect what they did in the Beit HaMikdash. Rather, it would reflect what they did in the time of the Tanaim 200 years later. 200 years is a long time. But in other words, it's a retrojection from the time of the Tanaim for what those three brachot were. Because in the time of the early Tanaim, remember, the Amidah wasn't fully canonized yet. So for them, the most popular tefillot, of course, were Emet V'Yatziv, as we discussed earlier, and something like an Avodah and Birkat Kohanim. Regardless, it does tell us that Avodah is really early. But this is a very tempting solution. Honestly, when you look at the text, you're like, I like this. This is really tempting. The problem is the textual evidence for it is kind of weak, meaning all of the versions of the Mishnah that we have it this way. The Mishnah, the Gemara itself never questions the Mishnah's flow. And it's kind of a weak grounds to really push this section of the Mishnah so much further and later than the narrative of Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. Most likely, this is part of the narrative of Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah, but we can't tell for certain. One thing that Yitzchak Landis pointed out that I was very happy about was that we do have a parallel to that language from the pasuk in Vayikra, pasuk Chaf Gimel. It says there's only one time in the entire, I think one or two times in the entire Torah where it says anything about something like a liturgy during Korbanot. You see, in the corpus of Tanakh, we never find a specific, what do you call it, liturgy to be said while you're bringing a korban. But over here in this pasuk, we see Vayevo Moshe v'Aaron elo moed v'yetzu vayivarechu et ha'am v'yera kvod Hashem al kol ha'am. Right after they brought the chatat and the olah and the shlamim these are by the Yemei Miluim. Then it says they were Berech Kol Ha'am. They blessed the entire nation. So it could be that these languages, Baruch Hu Atam and Berech Ha'am, are similar. And perhaps there was an idea of blessing the nation, of giving a Birkat Kohanim and having the Kohanim do some sort of liturgy already at the earliest times of the Bayit Rishon, based on this pasuk. That's a very good idea. It's a very interesting point. But the Iker point remains, which is that Beracha of the Avodah is clearly something that we don't find in biblical times. It's something that we find much later. And by much later, I mean during the time of Bayit Sheni. Now, the next major source we also saw. We saw this the other week when we discussed the Bracha of Shomei Tefillah. This Mishnah is the Mishnah Sotad Perek Zayin. Mishnah Zayin. The Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah is talking about the service of Yom Kippur. And in the service of Yom Kippur, the Mishnah tells us something really interesting, that the Kohen Gadol would do a Kriyat HaTorah during the service of Yom Kippur. Doesn't say anywhere in the Torah to do a service to read from the Torah during Yom Kippur. It doesn't say that in Torah Moshe. Clearly, for some reason, the Kohen Gadol was reciting from a Sefer Torah on Yom Kippur. Why did he do that? We don't know. However, it could be it came from the Batei Knisiot, or it could be it started in the Beit HaMikdash. Whatever it was, after he would read the Sefer Torah, what would he do? He would say V'gololat Torah. He would roll up the Sefer Torah in his lap, and he would say Yotar ma shekaritu v'nechem katuv kan. More than what I have read before you is inside this book. Ube'asor shebchumash pikudim korei al peh u'mevarech alea shmona brachot. Then he would read a certain section of Peh, and then he would say 8 brachot. Al HaTorah, ve'al ha'avodah, ve'al ha'hodaya, ve'al mechilat avon, ve'al ha'mikdash, ve'al Yisrael, ve'al ha'kohanim, ve'al sha'ar ha'tefillah. This is a list of 8 brachot, one after the other. Now, anybody who knows the brachot of the Haftarah will look at this like, wait, Al HaTorah, ve'al Avodah, this sounds similar to the brachot of the Haftarah. And the truth is, it might be. We don't know exactly what all of these 8 berachot were. There's different versions in different braitot and Tosefta, etc., which, have one word more or one word less here or there. Some of them have bifnei atzmo or bifnei or what have you. But the essential point is here that we see a chain of 8 brachot, which is one of the first times we see in Jewish history that there's a chain of brachot, right? Until the Shemona Esrei, we don't really see that too many times. But the Kohen Gadol himself would say a chain of 8 brachot. Why? We have no idea. What is the purpose of these 8 brachot? No idea. Did they start in the Beit HaMikdash? No idea. Did they start in the Beit HaKnesset? No idea. The Talmud Yerushalmi is one of the first to give us a exposition on these brachot, and it even gives us the chatima, what the Talmud Yerushalmi believed to be the chatima. Now, it could be that this is an authentic tradition, or it could be that the Savora, who wrote or canonized the Talmud Yerushalmi, added in his retrojection from what he was praying in his time in the 400s. It could be that the whoever's responsible for the text of Yerushalmi added that in, because if you look here, we have Mevarech aleh shemona brachot. Al Torah, that's habocher b'Torah. Al havodah, that's shotcha nira v'na'avod. Right, that's the nusach of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. That was the Shemona Esrei. They said Al hodayah hatov l'chal hodot. Also, their nusach Shemona Esrei. We can't tell looking at this Yerushalmi if this Yerushalmi is authentic. Is it an authentic Braita, or is it simply an editor later adding in a retrojection? It's very, very difficult to tell. However, it would be interesting. Regardless, it's clear from the Gemara, it's clear from the Mishnah that they thought that the bracha of the Avodah in the Shemona Esrei, as we have it today, is the same bracha of the Avodah that they had in the Beit HaMikdash. And the bracha in Shemona Esrei that was canonized by Rabbi Gamliel B'Yavin is a direct descendant, if not the exact same thing as the bracha that they said in the Beit HaMikdash, with only one modification, and that is that they added a petition for the restoration of the service into the Beit HaMikdash. Now, in the Nusach Eretz Yisrael, of course, they only had Shotcha Levadacha B'Yar Na'avod. That's how they ended the bracha. So it doesn't end with Hamachazir Shechinato L'Tzion. Only the Nusach HaBavli does. We don't have to say that one is born in Bavel, one was born in Eretz Yisrael. You don't have to say that necessarily. However, um, we do see that the the bracha of Ritzeh is seen even by them to be extraordinarily early with very little difference. They just called it the Avodah. They knew it by name. They didn't have to say the text of the bracha. They just called it bracha of the bracha of Avodah. Okay. Now, Rashi and Reb Hai Gaon try to reconstruct the bracha of the Seder Avodah. Now, we don't know at all what the bracha was that the Kohen Gadol said in the Beit Mikdash, but Rashi gives a suggestion. Rashi says that it's say b'Amachai Yisrael v'tirtzeh ha'avodah b'dvir beitecha v'chulu. Baruch atah Hashem she'otcha levadecha b'yira na'avod. Rashi's here is retrojecting his own a bracha that he knows of from the Yamim Noraim. He's essentially merging his own daily Ritzeh with the one from Yamim Noraim, and he's creating his own nusach. What's interesting is that it's not clear if Rashi got this from him, but Rav Hai Gaon does the same. There's a tshuva where the Rashba quotes Rav Hai Gaon as having a very, very similar bracha. I think it's V'tirtza avodatenu lidvir beitecha. Rav Hai Gaon also had a similar nusach, and the Meiri also gives a nusach. He says, "Well, the Kohen Gadol must have said such and such and such." The problem is the Meiri in three different places says three different nuschot. So clearly he was inventing it every time, but they're slightly different. He didn't have a Masorah for it. But the most interesting suggestion he gives, in my opinion, is harotzeh be'avodat amo Yisrael. Harotzeh be'avodat amo Yisrael. In other words, he believes that the chatima, that the eulogy, the last part of the bracha was Harotze be'avodat amo Yisrael. Why is this interesting? This is really interesting because of the following. Ezra Fleischer in 1967, a very long time ago, he died in 2006, I believe, so he was doing research for almost 60 years. But in 1967, he published an article where he pointed out something brilliant. And because he was a computer of piyut, he could look at hundreds of piyutim and extrapolate data from all of them. What he saw was that he looked at all the collections of the shivatot, of specialized types of piyutim from Yanai. And it wasn't just piyutim from Yanai, but it was all sorts of piyutim from ancient Eretz Yisrael. And he said, look at these piyutim. If you look at these piyutim, these old poems from Eretz Yisrael that were used for the Shmona Esrei, these piyutim were meant to replace the Shmona Esrei, right? So you have this piyut, it's called a Shivata. It's a piyut written to replace a 7 bracha blessing. So if I have Shabbat, for example, or I don't know, let's call it Yom Tov. It's a bracha with 7 blessings. I could replace the 7 blessings with my poetic version of the 7 blessings, as long as the Chatima is the same, as long as it ends Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham, Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayeh Metim. So the rule is in those poems, the artistic rule is, again, this is an arbitrary rule, but it's followed by all the artists. The rule is that the last stanza of those poems, right, the last stanza is a bridge. It's kind of like a sequitur where it links you back to the chatima, because we know that the samuch chatima has to be me'en chatima. When you get near the end of the bracha, it has to be similar to the end. So if you're going to end with Magen Avraham, you have to mention either the word Magen or Avraham. You have to cycle back. When you're coming at the end of your poetic, embellished version of the bracha for Shemona Esrei, if you're an author of a piyut like this, you have to make your bracha authentically and halachically binding. So you're always going to use the last sentence to be me'ena chatima, similar to the chatima. And what Ezra Fleischer noticed is that among the dozens of shivatot we have, all of them insist on using the word ritzeh or ratzon or ratzita, something with the shoresh of resh tzadi hey. Something, all of those, what do you call it? All of those chatimot ended with that. However, the Nusach of Eretz Yisrael has always been she'otecha levadecha b'yira na'avod. So we have the Nusach Bavli, which ends Ritzeh with Hamachzir Shechinato L'Tzion. We have Nusach Yerushalmi, which ends she'otecha levadecha na'avod. But we don't have any chatima that has the word ratzon in it. So what's going on? Ezra Fleischer brought these and a few other brilliant rayos to prove that it's very likely that there was a chatima which ended with the word ratzon, but it's been completely lost to history. He suggests that perhaps it was shotecha biratzon na'avod, that was the original nusach, and it got changed from shotecha biratzon na'avod to something like shotecha bira na'avod, so something to that effect. It's a very good suggestion. But this brilliant chop 50 years, how many years ago is that already? Almost 60 years ago, was further built upon when we had more data to work with. And it's absolutely fantastic. So first of all, let's look at Sefer HaMaccabim Bet. Now, in Sefer Maccabees, as many people will know, is one of those apocryphal books. And it was written somewhere between 150 BC and 100 BC. Some have even dated it to later. But this is a book written from late Bayesheni, okay? From not probably not from the time of the Hashmonaim, but it's still Bayesheni. This is a book from Bayesheni. And in it, there's this section where they bring a korban and they say a tefillah. And in it, they say, Ritzeh bekorban leman kol amachai Yisrael u'shmor et chelko v'kodsho. The idea that there was this what's it called, emphasis on a word like Ritzeh was reinforced by our findings in the Sefer HaMaccabim, because we today start all our bracha, all of us start the bracha of Ritzeh with the word Ritzeh, and some of us say Tachbos banu v'tirtzenu, right? But the emphasis on find favor or find your will in our korban has clearly been around by a bracha or by a tefillah alongside a korban from very ancient times. Now, the catch here is that the Sefer Maccabim wasn't written in Hebrew; it was written in Greek. And I don't speak Greek. I wish I could tell you the word in Greek that they used, but Yitzhak Landis, he is much more familiar with Greek than I am, and he did look at this, and in his opinion, the language here written in the Sefer Maccabeim is essentially like, it's probably written by Hellenized Jews. So this korban prayer, which is written by the authors of the Sefer HaMaccabim, in his opinion, is very similar to other Greek korban prayers that were not Jewish. So he sees it as very much of a model of Hellenistic Jews. However, we do see the emphasis on a concept. We do see emphasis on something like Ritzeh in a bracha that was said by Jews. Furthermore, there is something called the Apostolic Constitutions. We discussed this when we discussed the the brachot and the tefillah of the Kedusha. The Apostolic Constitution, I'm sorry if my video froze, I'm not sure why, but the Apostolic Constitutions is a early church order. It's a text from the early church, and it was essentially it's the constitutions, the decrees of the apostles. Some early Christians really believed that it was. Many Christians believed that it was really written by the apostles in the first or second century, but truth is, everything dates it to Antioch in the fourth century, the late 300s. But in the text of the Apostolic Constitution, there is a few tefillot in Book 7. We've studied this before, where in Book 7, there is a tefillah which is very similar to the tefillah of Shmona Esrei. There's a tefillah there which is similar to the Amidah. And now we're running out of time, and I'm a little bit reluctant to go through the Christian text itself because, again, this is not a Jewish text and we are in a shul. But suffice it to say that there's a tefillah there in the Apostolic Constitutions, which is very similar to the Amidah of Shabbat. And in the Amidah of Shabbat, um, give me a second. In the Amidah of Shabbat, there we have 7 brachot. And there in the Apostolic Constitutions, there is also um, there's also a tefillah, which is very, very similar to Ritzeh. Let me show you for a second. I'll read to you just the relevant portions in Hebrew, because originally I think this was in Greek, but I'm going to just look at this right now with you. Give me one second. Here we go. The language is as follows. And if I had more time, Leonardo, I probably would have Um, we probably would have done this together, but I think the lashon is like this: Ata mileta haftachot biyad nevi'im, richamta al Tzion v'chamalta al Yushalayim, birom kisei David avdecha betocha. ואתה הקל האדון רצה בתחינת שפתי עמך, הקוראים אליך באמת כאשר רצית במנחות הצדיקים ובדורותיהם. Then it goes through the cycle of people, of different Nevi'im. לכן אתה רצה בתפילות עמך בידיעתם אותך באמצעות המשיח ברוח. Essentially, and again, this is easier, probably better in Greek. I think the English version is, and oops, jumped all the way down from 1 to 37. Let me get down to 37. There we go. 37. In English, it is. Okay, I can't find it, but it's probably better that I don't do it in a shul. Okay. Anyway, essentially, even in the apostolic constitutions, the where are we? Stop share. Okay. Even in the apostolic constitutions, we have a remez to something like Ritzeh, something very, very similar to Ritzeh. Now, a major asterisk has to be added here. This is a Christian source. This is not a Jewish source. So while the bracha is so similar that it must have Jewish roots, you cannot say that these Christian people in the fourth century were influenced by the Shemona Esrei. It is almost impossible to say that these Christian people, if you just read the rest of the apostolic constitutions, you'll see how different the style is and what a different planet these people came from. It's most likely, and Landis points this out, it's most likely that they received this Shabbat Amidah and these types of prayers from the generations before them. And by their time, by the time of the writers of these constitutions, they didn't consider it Jewish anymore. They considered it Christian. So even though they have in there a bracha that's not a bracha, but a prayer that has very similar content to Ritzeh, it doesn't mean that they directly saw the Beracha of Ritzeh in the fourth century. However, what's most important for our purposes is that the bracha of Ritzeh, the Avodah, this bracha began in the Beit HaMikdash. We saw how the Mishnah in Tamid, the Mishnah in Sotah, both testify that a bracha called Avodah was said in the Beit HaMikdash. We noted that in our versions, we don't have a chatimah that ends with the word Avodah. We don't have a chatimah that ends with the word Ritzeh. And we can clearly see that our bracha has a diachronic history that formed throughout the time from even from the time of the Beit HaMikdash to until directly after the Churban. That's the topic we're going to have to look at a little bit more next week. How did it form after the Churban? Why and how did the fall of the Beit HaMikdash affect this bracha directly? Who and how changed the bracha to end with Hamachazir Shechina Tel Tzion, or to ask for tefillah instead of korban, to ask for restoration instead of continuation. And how did this very strange bracha come to be? So I hope to delve into that more next week. I'm sorry if my video paused. I think there's some sort of driver bug where my computer's camera failed. But thank you to everybody for your time, for your attention. Bezrat Hashem, next week we will learn a lot more. I hope we will get to the further than just the time of the Gonim. I want to get to everything. So thank you for your attention. We will continue next week.